It was so horrific. I mean, this was someone who was sitting in his brother-in-law's house, and he gets a call, and the call basically is an Israeli military officer or an intelligence officer, and they're telling him, Ahmad, do you want to die on your own or with your family? That was it.
It's
And he
bone
says
chilling.
alone,
Yeah.
and hangs up. But as you can imagine, it's a very, it's an incredibly sort of powerful image. I mean, just imagine this person sitting with his family in this situation. And he hangs up, his family sees that he's very, distraught, obviously. And when he tells them, they initially actually try to help him, right? They tell him, okay, we can like maybe cause a diversion, or we can make you dress up in women's clothing, go out, etc. And he just says, there's no point, right? I mean, technology is just too powerful. They know my face. There's no question that he would be bombed. And the only thing that would happen is that basically his family would also be killed. So he basically just goes out, and as he's going out of the house, he sees his wife, and he ignored her. He didn't say anything. She started talking to him, but he ignored her just so that she wouldn't stop him or anything, and just goes straight to his car. Just maybe 5 seconds after he starts it up, just these two missiles come and they blow him up.
The story of Ahmed Termos gives harrowing insight into the development of a new type and intensity of Israeli AI warfare. This week, I spoke to Nabih Bulos, the Middle East bureau chief at the LA Times. We talk about his recent story about the development of a suffocating panopticon and also the summary execution of a Lebanese man, all with AI at the core. It all starts with the collection of an unimaginable amount of data on the people of Southern Lebanon. How did you kind of reverse engineer what led to that moment in terms of Israeli intelligence, the underlying infrastructure that might have enabled Israel to take this kind of a controlled action and, I guess, execution?
First off, it should be said that Ahmed Termos used to be a fighter, right? He used to be a Hezbollah fighter in his youth. And then as he grew up, as he became older and retired, he became what is known as a rabit, a liaison. Now, Hezbollah, it should be said, is not just a military force and also has a powerful political and social component. And that means taking care of the infrastructure in the villages that are, let's say, affiliated with Hezbollah in terms of a political entity. And so, in this case, he basically was involved in helping rebuild the village he was in, right? This was a village in South Lebanon, in Tallusa. And this is actually quite close to the Israeli border and had been destroyed in the last few wars. And so he was involved in rehabilitation, water, electricity, etc. And he had just come back from a meeting with Hezbollah members and also other municipal figures, right, to talk about the situation in the village. And then that's when the call came. Now, how I sort of reverse engineered this. Now, it should be said, Lebanon has in many ways already been penetrated, right? We've seen this time and again over the last few years, especially. Now, I should add that nothing on its own is necessarily revolutionary, right? This idea of collecting this much data, whether that's from drones or from phones or social media, right? We've heard about this for really a decade at this point, right? From Snowden and others, right? So we know that this is possible. Right. The difference is that you have this AI sitting on top of all that data. But I'll get to that in a second. Right. The way that I sort of understood all this stuff to be happening is that, for example, so Lebanon's phone database, right? The phone lists that you have for the two main phone providers in the country, right? Those were apparently handed over really back in 2005, 2006, I believe, right? After this something called the Special Tribunal that was for a trial to basically capture Hezbollah members who were accused of assassinating a certain politician in the country. And so I was told that even then, all that database was already sent abroad and therefore almost certainly leaked to the Israelis. But then you also have things that are structural. I mean, for example, maybe about 10 years ago, right, you could actually send a message on SMS, like with a license plate number, and you could then actually get the full information of the car owner, of the vehicle owner. So that database was also, obviously all hoovered up. Then you tack on this idea, right, that the Israelis now have these drones, that are really actually constantly above southern Lebanon, just all the time. And of course, they themselves can act as cell towers, right? They actually have a stronger signal than the local cell tower signal. And therefore, that just, hoovers up the data, the IMI of the phone, right, the IMSI and all this other information, which means that now, even if you switch SIM cards, you would still be tracked, right, across various phones. In fact, if you frequently switch phones, that would actually add to your threat profile based on this metadata-driven analysis that we're talking about. Then you also have to tack on the fact that, for example, you have actually quite a few instances where the Israelis managed to hack into security cameras. So you have a security camera in front of your house or what have you, right? They were able to hack into those because actually most of them it's a brand, I believe it's called Danwi. It's a Chinese brand. And there have already been quite a few documented hacks into these cameras, right? And of course, you add on ALPR vision, all this other stuff, to read license plates, etc. And with all that, you can actually create a fairly detailed pattern of life for anyone you want, especially in Southern Lebanon, where really you have at least 2 drones in the sky at any point in time, especially over the last 2 years now. So, if you combine all that information, Ahmed Termos was a known figure in the sense that he was, he was affiliated with Hezbollah, right? You had this drone above him all the time for really a year plus. You have also the ability to hack in security cameras, and they can hoover up all the cell phone data from his phone and others, right? And they can also, I should add, they have access to the Tetra network. Tetra is the network for civil defense and emergency workers and police. And so that too was apparently hacked. And finally, there have been actually quite a few documented instances of spies in Lebanon who have actually gone around the country with RF scanners and have, just a detailed, breakdown of all the various networks and frequencies you have in the country. So all this is to say that the country is quite penetrated, right?
Yeah.
And again, none of this is a smoking gun on its own, but taken together, you can start the big picture.
So you, I think, have this picture of just a vast amount of data collection at every level, at the level of individual, at the level of geographic relationships, at the level of, I don't know, like up to the minute, everything. That's a lot of data, but a lot of data doesn't necessarily turn into insight. Do you want to describe a little bit about the difference maker, or sort of how Israel has been deploying AI on top of all of this massive amounts of data collection?
Sure, it's a huge, huge, huge advantage. I mean, just to give you a sense of this, right? Back in the day in the Iraq War, you would have, for example, 2,000 analysts working with all this data, just sifting through all this data to be able to come up with a targets list of some sort. And let's be clear, this was not a very extensive target list, right? You would have a situation where you had all these air assets and they couldn't actually, they didn't have enough targets for them. That's not the case with Israel, right? Israel actually has been talking about a full AI suite, right? Not just the ones we've heard about in the reporting from 972 magazine and others, right? You also have a situation where even for something as simple as fire control or other things, all this is done now via AI. And it's been talked about since early 2023, before the Gaza war, let's be clear. Right, that's been the main thing, because now you have this ability of a group, for example, like Palantir, to go in, tag, and score, all this data, right? And then what the AI does, it basically is a function of pattern analysis, right? You feed the AI or you train the AI on previous instances of attacks, right? Or on profiles of known, militants or figures, right? Or you do things of that nature. And through that, right, with that sort of pattern fed into the system, it then goes and takes all this data and tries to sort of pick out other patterns. That's been a huge thing in this case. And the Israelis boast about it all the time. I mean, I found this Israeli military article where they talk about how this happens within seconds, right? I mean, it's not even minutes. They suddenly, they feed just this huge phone list into the system and it spits out possible militants with a pretty high level of probability, apparently.
With scale, I would think would introduce inaccuracy, and also a level of cold, calculated, essentially assassinations, where it's not we're looking for this person or we would like it if this person died in some type of skirmish. It's we have this person on a list and we also have the capability of, with precision, killing them. That feels like a step change that's distinct from generating more target lists so that you know where to send your air assets. So where do you think the threshold is for Israel in terms of knowing someone is actually a combatant, making the decision that they are a threat in a way that would justify them taking lethal action? Where are we seeing the decision points within these systems where historically there would be a human making a determination as to whether or not it was appropriate, or is that lost in this?
Well, so a few things, right? I mean, it's also important to note that these are basically LLMs at play, right? And we know, right, that LLMs
which are bad technologies.
They just have a built-in factor of error, right? And this cannot be fixed up. I mean, they've been talking about sort of scaling up and therefore reducing the error. But you and I both know that this is a very, very difficult endeavor. And the fact is, if ChatGPT gives me the wrong information about how to make a cake, that's one thing, right? But if ChatGPT then tells me this guy is a militant when they're, a farmer or whatever, then that's a different situation, obviously, right? Now that's one aspect of it, right? But then, there are others. The fact is that, you also have a situation where the Israelis can decide how much collateral damage is acceptable based on the value of a certain target that they're after. I mean, I spoke to one person who I didn't mention in this article, right? Because I couldn't just confirm what he had been saying, but he was saying to me before that the difference between the American use of AI versus the Israeli use of AI is that the Americans tend to be more careful about collateral damage. Then we can talk about how right or wrong that is, but it's a matter of levels, right? I mean, you can say, that you are accepting, let's say, 5 people, right, within the sort of splash radius of the ordinance to be killed, whereas others would say, okay, 20 or 1 or whatever, right? Now, the Israelis, we've seen instances where you've had 200 people being killed in the name of getting a target. Now, in Lebanon, we haven't seen that level, of course, but this idea of who is a militant and who's not. And in fact, there's a paper, and this is beyond even a matter of AI, right? If you simply rely on metadata, right, to decide if someone is guilty or not of a certain act, right, you start to enter, very much into minority report territory, quite frankly,
Yeah,
right?
it's non-deterministic. You're essentially guessing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly so. And it should also be said, right, that at the same time, this stuff can be happening just in terms of, something as simple as co-location. For example, let's say that, like my house is a known Hezbollah tunnel, right? Where then anyone walking past my house is tagged by this system, right? I mean, that puts them within the, let's say, the eyesights of this system in the first place. Then the system starts to track them, right? It might dedicate more resources to tracking them. It starts to build a pattern of life. Let's say this person sleeps at 11 p.m. and wakes up at 7 a.m. Well, one day they woke up at 2 a.m. and drove towards a certain area that is known to have a Hezbollah tunnel. That increases their threat profile. And the way this goes is it's essentially a real-time updated threat profile. My understanding, and again, I couldn't get a definitive figure as to the thresholds as to when someone is put into the tasking of an airstrike. But the idea is that all this is automatic up to the point where they are put in the tasking. Once they're put in the tasking for an airstrike, that's when the final sign-off comes off, from a human operator. But I mean, as we've seen in the reporting in other places, this is really essentially a rubber stamp situation. I mean, we've seen it, with people doing normal tasks. So this is, very much the same way.
So why do you think Ahmed Termos was targeted? When you think back at this story, like, do you have a sense of like what the threshold was given? Was it his history? Was it like, why?
No, I don't think it was his history. So, the day before his killing, he had turned off his phone, he put it at home, right? And then the next day he went to a meeting with municipal figures, that also included Hezbollah officials, of course. And his phone was still off and at home. And then when he came back from the meeting, that's when he was, he picked up the phone and he got the call. So now it should be said, Israel has been targeting Hezbollah figures who are not combatants for quite some time now. I mean, just as we saw with Hamas and Gaza, the idea is to sort of create, I suppose, an AI equivalent of the Phoenix program in Vietnam, where you basically assassinate, all the support figures, right? Not just fighters, but, the village elder, right? The village, whatever. The idea being here is that you are denying Hezbollah its native operating environment. What that means in practice is that you're killing everyone, right? Whether they are civilians or whatever, and you are razing villages, which is basically what is happening right now in South Lebanon. My sense was that since he had gone to this municipal meeting and was involved in rebuilding the village, this was already a problem for Israel, and therefore he had to be killed, right? Because he was the one who was liaising with Hezbollah and other villages in terms of getting them rebuilt.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a war crime. I don't know. That sounds, I mean, that level of threshold of participation in something that is in a country where the political parties and sort of official structures of governance are intricately connected, that fundamentally means that in Lebanon, in Palestine, in places where governance is structured in that way, that basically civilians are, it would be acceptable to execute civilians.
That's pretty much what is happening. The fact of the matter is that Hezbollah, again, is not a simple fighting group. Not everyone is a combatant. You have administrators, you have others, right? You have school teachers. I mean, it actually has a robust school system as well. So what does that mean, right? Where do you where do you draw the line? And you can think of it also in terms of like the U.S. military, right? It's worth knowing, for example, right, that for every fighter there are 3 administrators, right? And you can bet that if you saw, for example, an attack on an office building with armed logisticians, people would probably be angry about it, right? It would be considered beyond the pale because they are not actual combatants, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, of course, it is a war crime, right? There's no question of this. But I mean, as we've seen in Gaza, it is just a different situation when it comes to these non-state actors like Hezbollah and Hamas, even though
Yeah.
they have a strong civilian component.
My last question is just this isn't your normal beat, or AI isn't the sort of normal things you cover, but you do cover questions of power, questions of sort of political structures in contexts that are extremely complicated and have huge implications for everyday people. I'm wondering sort of what you learned in the process of this AI reporting that you might not have known about, or sort of if you use the lens of your more traditional reporting, like how you see the developments with technology, both with Israel, but more generally AI in warfare.
So I should say my focus is mostly on war, right? And that's a function of my location, but also a little bit, it's also my interest. And, war's changed, right? Even war coverage has changed. We are talking about level of surveillance and the sort of panopticon feeling, especially in Lebanon, but elsewhere as well, where it just doesn't feel safe to be able to operate in areas near the front line because everywhere has become a front line. Everywhere is surveilled, right? Before, you could feel, for example, that you were able to function, within a certain margin, right? That feels gone now, I should say. And I mean, again, the best way I think of it now is this idea of like Minority Report, where you can just sort of construct this image of someone, and if it vaguely fits a certain pattern, right, regardless of anything else, then you're marked for whatever. So I mean, the main feeling I've had, and of course I should say this extends to other sort of elements involving AI as well. I mean, I'm a journalist, and obviously the job is at risk because of AI. That's clear, right? But with all that being said, this situation really sort of, I mean, it really crystallized for me how dangerous it is now to operate in places like Lebanon. They're just so penetrated, and it's going to have to involve a real effort, I think, to combat this level of surveillance and this level of penetration in such a way that you can operate somewhat normally again. And again, I'm not saying that I should do something nefarious or whatever, but just for like
Yeah,
normal privacy situations. There's something really very eerie about the level of control you can exercise here if you want to. And the
kiwi.
problem
Yeah,
really is also that before you could have some sense of guarantee of privacy within your home to a degree. You put your phone
sure.
off, right? Whatever, you don't have a smart TV, etc. Right? You could figure out some way to achieve some level of privacy. It just feels like it's gone now, really. And the
Yeah.
fact is that increasingly it feels like you have to live like you're back in the Stone Age. I've already had this sense before this story, but especially after it. I'm increasingly after dumb items. I don't want a smart car. I don't want a smart TV, right? I'm thinking of getting an old Nokia and just using it when I'm in the field. I just don't want any kind of modern accoutrement that's going to put me at risk. And it feels
Yeah.
that everything is. And that's an
Yeah.
awful feeling, I have to say.
Yeah. Agree. Okay. Well, thank you for this story. It was really eye-opening, both in terms of how the technology is being used, but also what's happening in Lebanon, and how brazen Israel is growing in a way that feels it must stop. When it stops,
Why
no
should it?
one
America hasn't
knows.
stopped it, is the fact, right? I mean, America has not stopped it. And the fact is that, you can't say that you are providing a calming impact on a certain party if you give them all the weapons all the time and endless intelligence support. Right? There needs to be some consequences for actions, but I'm not holding my breath, unfortunately.
Yeah, me neither. Okay, well, thank you so much. And thanks for the reporting. And we'll drop a link to it in the description. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks to Nabih for joining us this week. His reporting is both powerful and disturbing, but it's also a really important reminder of how much is at stake as AI transforms war. Speaking of which, if you'd like to learn more about how AI is being used in warfare, we're currently doing a whole podcast series about this called Computer Says Kill. We'll put a link in the description, and thanks for tuning in.